Thanks, David. And I want to thank the panelists all for all of your work, all of the knowledge that I've gained from each of you through this time. I took it upon myself in preparing for today's meeting to draft a statement that answers the 8 questions that we were provided at the beginning of the last summer when the panel was created. So I'm going to read the question out loud. I'm going to read my statement, and I'm going to pause and let you think and reflect. And if there's, remember, this isn't all of the details associated with each of these answers, right? This is to be a kind of high level, make sure we've got the major points there. And this is an initial take for these answers. So the first question goes, what types of scientific data currently collected and archived by NASA or other civilian government entities should be synthesized and analyzed prior to potentially shed light on the nature and origins of UAP? So the panel reviewed data sources, analytic tools, data architectures from NASA, NOAA, FAA, Commerce, and others. The data that we recognize were not collected for the purpose of identifying UAP, which leaves bias in the data that was collected. Even though there is an immense amount of data available, it is hard to access, and the sensors that were used were not well calibrated for identifying anomalous phenomena. No questions. Moving forward. Question number 2. I kind of feel like Jeopardy. What types of scientific data currently collected and held by nonprofits and companies should be synthesized and analyzed to potentially shed light on the nature and origins of UAP? Many organizations exist to track sightings of anomalous phenomena in the Earth's atmosphere, both nonprofit, for-profit, and otherwise. The study panel concluded that much of the inputs collected by these organizations are not considered scientific data in nature, and that they do not contain unbiased information, they're not repeatable, and they typically come with eyewitness accounts, which we've heard even today, that there's hesitations with using only eyewitness accounts to recognize or identify UAP. To the point about commercial or companies, there are a lot of space companies that some lobbied hard to get in to present to us. They have troves of data, but they're collected for a variety of different purposes than the purpose of UAP. And those systems, while they are well calibrated, are only one source of many that could be used. And questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Carla.
I'll bite on that one, Jen. You know, I think your answer is correct as to what we've seen, but where I would go is if we made a recommendation to NASA that, you know, we're really asking them to build a roadmap, and we haven't done a robust cataloging. We've looked at sources, mentioned sources that we think might be relevant, but perhaps a more robust effort cataloging would be a good modest start.
That's good. I will, only in slight defense of trying to answer the exact question as posed to the panel, rather than trying to add recommendations at this point. But yes, point well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the data sets that we just learned about, heard more about today, and thinking about sort of calibrating things, is the FAA data on anomalous, tracking events, right? And I think this is something where, if we had, some imaging software, people, citizen scientists with cell phone cameras identify some event that looks interesting, one of the places you'd like to be able to turn is the FAA data. And having, if there is, to go back to, having a NASA responsibility for data, NASA might, has a lot of experience in serving as a clearinghouse for data from across the government for civilian data, right? This is something we do in lots of different areas. And I think there are some opportunities with data sets there, and I think the radar data is one that comes to mind as one we don't want to forget about as an available data set.
Yeah, absolutely. Question 3, I think, goes more towards the recommendations of what other types of scientific data should be collected by NASA to enhance the potential for developing an understanding of the nature and origins of UAP. So we've heard now from 2 of the panelists on some of the information that should be collected, or the way that some of that data should be organized in a manner to make it available for people to analyze that information. And the only other thoughts that I had here was really recognizing the difference in the sensor thresholds, right? So we can't always tune a sensor all the way to the resolution that we might need or we might want. And as we collect that data, to recognize for the scientists that are doing those analyses the bounds of each of the systems that they're using. Yeah.
You know, what strikes me on that one, when you were reading the answer, the proposed answer, was what may be new, may be something that's new to NASA in the sense of like a time series, so we can know what's normal, so we can perhaps identify what's not normal or anomalous, right? So I'm not sure to what extent it's like the most unsexy thing to sell on the face of the planet, right, is making consistent long-term observations. But I think that the agency may be set up to do just that for multiple reasons, right?
Yeah. Persistent
Yeah.
data collection.
The agency does that in a lot of cases for astrophysical purposes. So the infrastructure, of course, pointing up and pointing at a different distance, but the infrastructure for collecting this kind of data, organizing it, keeping it, and that does exist.
Yeah. And there are, in their defense, a lot of satellite companies that are doing that persistent collection as well. Okay. Question 4, which scientific analysis techniques currently in production could be employed to assess the nature and origins of UAP? Which types of analysis techniques should be developed? So this is a 2-part with what exists today and what should be. So we're looking also at recommendations. Based on the information provided by the presenters to the panel, there are very few credible analysis techniques available that currently exist to assess the nature and origins of UAP. The onset of artificial intelligence and automated analysis techniques give promise to being able to do that in the future.
I wanted to add something to that, perhaps, which is that really to design the analysis, you need to know what the data looks like, right?
Yes.
So, we can't really say what kind of analysis should be created on the hypothetical data that we're recommending should be collected in some, somewhat specified fashion.
If it's all hypothetical and we want
Right.
to collect all of this data and we know what format it's going to be in, we can design analysis techniques around it.
And at that point, it's likely that there are analysis techniques that already exist.
Absolutely.
There's a wealth of anomaly detection work. We just don't know which one will be most suitable because the data, as it should be, doesn't exist yet.
Correct.
She said exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at with my point. Not that those analysis techniques don't exist in the scientific community, just that they're not being applied to this problem set right now, and it's hard to apply them when we don't have the known data of what would go into those. David?
Yeah, I think something we want to stress here is the importance of uniform data
Yes.
in the way it's collected, because particularly when you're looking for outliers, if you have data coming from many different observing techniques, right, and just having a uniform set of cameras, a uniform set of detectors, so you understand and characterize them, right, because this is a needle in the haystack problem, and every camera, I'd mentioned in the opening session, ghosting in optics.
Yes.
That's going to be different in every different detector, right? And before we get to the analysis techniques, we want to make sure we design the data collection so that the analysis techniques can effectively be used on it.
Right.
David, can I take a slight issue with that, which is It sounds like you're implying that you need a single way of collecting the data. I'd argue it's really you need to understand the various ways in which you're collecting the data, and you're able to cross-calibrate across those different approaches. Because I seriously doubt that there is a single detector.
I think a handful of ways so that you're
Yeah.
well characterized. Things need to be well characterized to be
Yeah.
useful, I guess is the way I would state it. And it takes time and energy to well characterize things. So that's I think the challenge.
So following up on both your points, I think it's where we can actually apply artificial intelligence. So we cannot apply artificial intelligence on the current data, but we can apply artificial intelligence in a way that we can design characteristics for the data that we need and how we can collect the data that we need. So.
This is probably more of a frustration than anything else, so I don't know how helpful it'll be, but I think we're not looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for an anomaly in a haystack. We don't even know that we're looking for a needle. That
It's just a discolored piece of hay.
well, I'm from Montana, so I love good hay analogy. I don't know what the phenomenology is that we're looking for. We say anomalous. Again, this question earlier, what does that mean? Anomalous acceleration? Like, I think as we try to look at the data, we're starting from an almost impossible position when if we don't know what we're looking for, is it a radiation signature? Is it something electromagnetic? Is it something like that? Is why this is so challenging and frustrating to me that we're talking about monitoring something that we don't even know what we're supposed to monitor.
And let me just offer, Josh, before you jump in, the scientific process of hypothesis-driven research, right? Of that, while we don't know all of the possible outcomes in the entire world, we can ask very specific questions and go about it in a very scientific process to understand. So you're right, we don't know exactly what we're looking for, but we know hotspots, as we've seen from both FAA and Aero. We do know some of those conditions that we might be looking for. So if you start with kind of what you know, or places to start to go and look, and you start with the data that we have available to us, we might start being able to untangle the chicken and egg problem.
Jen, what is the phenomena that we're looking for?
So we've heard them from Sean. I would pull up Sean's chart, but I can't quickly do that. Of the criteria that he said on the trends, I use the word criteria, he said trends, of 6 or 7 phenomena, I guess, of specific size or within a specific motion range. And it's something different than what we've seen before, something we don't recognize. And so when you go to look for something that you don't recognize, it can be pretty easy, in that we've fooled ourselves today and even watching some of these videos of what's going on. But when you're able to corroborate that with 3 or 4 other sources, it starts to make sense. Right? So something that looks like magic to the naked eye or to that camera and that sensor isn't, once you understand all of the effects of what was going on in the surrounding environment.
So I've got a question. Can we, because I got the same frustration you do, right? It's regardless of what you're looking for, if you don't know what it is, whether you're using AI or match filtering techniques, you can't find it, right? You can't find it. So because the question I have is, can we use social media, that kind of thing, as a way of cueing to know where something's happening? Because we know Google searches can lead you to better understand where outbreaks happen, right? Disease outbreaks. Can you use similar type of conflation of data to start saying, well, something's going on here, let's start cueing sensors in that area? That requires some real-time capability, but is that something we can think about?
Can I object to that just a bit? You can find things that you don't know how they look.
Okay.
There is a lot of the algorithms in anomaly detection are really based on let's find out how what we know looks like, so that anything that doesn't look like that can be identified and spotted, and then we can think whether or not we understand it, right? And so I think the point about the homogeneous detectors really is about that. We need to have a solid understanding of the normal to detect the anomalous or the outliers, as we sometimes perhaps more often call them in science, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to be cautious of time. We were supposed to end this about 10 minutes ago.
Right, so, but this is drifted into discussion, but I think we're doing discussion. So do you have any last topic you want to hit? If not, then we'll just open up to general discussion.
I have 4 more questions that we're technically supposed to answer.
All right, let's do one.
We can
And
do
then we'll-
4 questions in 2 minutes, right? Okay,
1 2 minutes.
speed round.
Fast.
In considering all of the factors above, what basic physical constraints can be placed on the nature and origins of UAP? Mike, would you like to take this question?
Absolutely. Needle in the haystack.
Okay, got it. In my notes to answer this, knew that Sean had presented some trends, so I used that kind of as the basis for what basic physical constraints could be available, and also Josh's presentation that he just presented of, we know some of these are still in the realm of understanding. We just haven't applied basic physics to understand what's there, what we have. Question 6, what civilian airspace data related to UAPs have been collected by government agencies and are available for analysis to A, inform efforts to better understand the nature and origins of UAPs, and B, determine the risk of UAPs to the national airspace? So we saw some of this in, I'm going to use examples from today to kind of move quickly. Some of this in Mike Free's presentation, talking about the air risks, right, that FAA is always looking out for. We know by altitude and by sensor and curvature of the Earth and line of sight, and as you get higher that you can see more, right? So we have a lot of civilian airspace data that can start to understand the nature and origins of the UAP, and determining the risk is based on how much you know, right? So you think about, I go straight to space and I think about satellites, and one tiny piece of space debris can destroy an entire satellite because they're moving really, really fast in the vacuum of space. It's not necessarily so true in airspace, right? But something that we don't know could have a severe impact on pilots and their flight plan and all of that, which then could really wreak havoc on all of the United States airspace. And so being able to understand and identify what those phenomena are will help de-risk the air flight safety in the national airspace. Question 7. What current reporting protocols and air traffic management data acquisition systems can be modified to acquire additional data on past and future UAPs? We've heard a lot of the reporting structures. It was talked about earlier today. Those probably can be adapted and improved, and it's up to us in discussion as the panel on what those recommendations might be. Question 8, and I'll get off stage. What potential enhancements to the future air traffic management development efforts can be recommended to acquire data concerning future reported UAPs to assist in the effort to better understand the nature and origins of the UAPs? The potential enhancements, automatic filtering of the knowns has come up as a talking point. These are specific really to acquiring data, the tuning of those sensor platforms, the multimodal spectrum collection, and being able to kind of timestamp or geostamp each of those to corroborate the sightings. So I will leave the panel with that, with time to continue discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, sorry.